Welcome back to Pod of the Century. Galen Clavio, Austin Platt joining you here today as we are finished with match day 9. We're finished with the second round of group stage games. Austin, it's hard to believe, but we've only got 4 more days of the group stage, and then we're out of it. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel great. I don't have to feel bad about missing the 5 a.m. matches now. That's one good thing. But this tournament goes by so fast. Of course, the whole timing of it really makes your day kind of backwards, really, and you feel nocturnal at times. But I think the fact that we're already this far, and this has been an awesome World Cup with all the things surrounding Qatar. The play on the field has been remarkable, and today was no shortage of that. With the first 2 matches before practically anyone wakes up, you're already banging out a 6-goal, 3-3 thriller, and then a 3-2 game as well. This World Cup has not disappointed at all.
No, it really has not. It's been fascinating. And look, so much rightfully has been talked about in terms of the political ramifications of things and everything going on with kind of the non-football stuff. And, as we've talked about before on this podcast and elsewhere, those things are important. They do need to be talked about. And it was always going to be a situation where once you got into the tournament, the momentum of the football was going to kind of take a lot of that stuff away. Now, more so than, frankly, I thought was going to be the case. But wow, the football's actually been just so much better than I thought it would be as well. And so that's really been fascinating, as it has been very hard to get a bead on who's good, other than Brazil, who continues to look dominant. And I guess France, who is already through as well. In every group, there's something very mysterious about what's going to happen here in these last few days. And there have been a lot of teams that have surprised from the beginning. There's been a lot of teams that waited a match, that looked terrible at first, and then surprised afterwards. And then there's been a lot of teams that have really disappointed. So, Austin, let's dive right into what happened today. We'll start with the game that just wrapped up, Portugal and Uruguay. Uruguay at this stage kind of feels like maybe the most disappointing team in the tournament, other than Belgium, perhaps, because and both of them kind of occupy the same space. Like, they're both teams that in the 2010s were successful. They advanced further than they'd advanced in a long time in the case of Uruguay and definitely in the case of Belgium in the World Cup. And I think to some degree we thought that branding was going to carry through. And with Uruguay in particular, they played kind of a listless game against South Korea, and then they played this Portugal team and they looked completely passive for way too long. And by the time they finally got into the game, it was essentially too late.
Yeah, this Uruguay team has been very confusing. We know some of the big stars, and we talk about some of these teams, whether it's their golden generation or whether kind of the overhaul of talent. Of course, we know Luis Suarez has been the name for a while. Of course, he's not the man anymore. And the fact that they really didn't feel like they were ever really in this match, the fact that they were kind of going for a draw, it almost felt like, was a bit concerning. And then we know at one point for Portugal, they can just turn it up with the way Bruno Fernandes plays and the incredible touch that he has, and that one cross in, and whether Ronaldo's going to claim the goal or not. They were playing kind of on the back foot from the very start, which is very questionable. I know this is, of course, their big match, and this was supposed to be one of the best matches of the tournament in the sense that a lot of people really have liked Uruguay and their team. But, look at Cavani and others really didn't quite have the opportunity. And then, the best chance for Bentancur kind of in one-on-one tries to be a bit sneaky and go 5-hole instead of trying to just tink it over the keeper and have it go in. It was questionable from the very beginning. And on the other hand, Portugal really looked like a really smooth team that could really impress and could be here in the final days of the tournament.
I will say, I thought that the Bentancur shot, like if he had just kept it on the carpet, it would have slid right under the keeper. But he almost tried to have it. And that was not a, but again, Bentancur, not a goal scorer. And as we've talked about, so much of this cup has been about who's got goal scorers and who doesn't. What's been confusing about Uruguay is how bad the service has been. I mean, even when they ramped things up, switched to 4 at the back in the second half, and really started pressing along the flanks, very few of those passes went anywhere close to an Uruguayan. I thought Cavani was really bad for them in the 70 or so minutes that he played. And then they brought Suarez on, and he essentially did nothing either. Nunez was essentially non-existent. And, the Uruguay's game against South Korea now, like, you watched that and you thought to yourself, wow, South Korea is an incredible defensive team. They were able to hold that Uruguayan team in place. And with what we saw this morning, combined with what we saw in this, it's like, well, maybe Uruguay just isn't very good on offense, and that's not what anybody expected coming into this tournament.
And that kind of goes against all the other teams we've been talking about. We think, oh, maybe the weaker teams aren't as bad as we think, and maybe just the good teams are just having to play to competition that's closer to them. But then we think Uruguay could be the exact opposite. Well, maybe they're making the weaker teams look a bit better than they should.
Yeah, so Portugal is through. Fernandez picks up the brace, and it was, I mean, you just wonder if Uruguay had come out in a better formation, if they had played more on the front foot, if this game is different. I'm still not terribly impressed with Portugal. I think their defense is very easy to break down, and they're so small. They're very fast, but their attacking players are so diminutive, with the exception of Ronaldo, that they're easy to muscle off the ball. We saw that several times as they were trying to make moves. I think they're going to run into real trouble as they get into this next phase, but they've done about the best thing that they could possibly do, as long as they end up winning the group, because they're going to set themselves up opposite from Brazil. They're not going to have to deal with the Brazilians, and that is about as golden of a ticket as you can get right now, I think, going into the knockout stage. So let's switch gears. Let's talk about that Brazil team. They qualify through, and they look like they're going to win that group just straight away. It takes a while, and Switzerland, after playing a similarly passive first half, changed formations. Brazil made a questionable substitution, and we watched this game together earlier today. It was interesting because it really did look like Switzerland had found some kind of magic sauce. They were getting chances, and then just an individual moment of brilliance from Casemiro, and that was it. And you kind of felt like it was coming, but it was, there was a moment there where it's like, maybe they can hold them to a draw here, and maybe Switzerland puts themselves in a better case. Not what happened at all. Brazil walks away with all three.
It feels like we're kind of watching the same match, the Portugal and the Brazil. That both these teams could be in it, could play each other at some point in the knockout stage, but they both, weren't really all that impressive today. And the fact that, of course, there's no Neymar, that's the main talking point. And the Brazil team didn't really have that inspiration or really execution, creativity as much in that final third. And we saw the offsides goal where that pressure that Switzerland, I think they finally thought, well, maybe we can get something out of this, because they were picking up the momentum in the second half, when Brazil at the beginning weren't doing much of anything, to be quite frank. And then, the offside goal, which was really, really, really tight, where the Swiss kind of picked up their press, and then it felt like it was going to have to happen. Of course, the Richarlison goal earlier, that little scissor kick, and it feels like another one from Casemiro, that lovely one too. It just happened so fast, and whether there was a deflection or not, which led it into the side of the net, that was the difference. But we're going to see really how long Neymar is out. He posted the picture of him sitting in the hotel room with his ankle as big as a golf ball, it felt like, which is definitely a concern. But you're not going to get an individually brilliant goal every single time. So I think the main takeaway from the matches that a lot of us here in the U.S. could really watch for all 90 minutes is that, well, maybe Brazil and Portugal weren't as clinical today when they needed to, but this kind of felt like the game where, of course, with the other results today, both these teams came in with 3 points and the other one ended in a draw, that neither team would have been really disappointed necessarily with a draw, but I don't think Switzerland really felt, well, they needed to go out and necessarily win this game, and they have still a pretty good chance of qualifying. But it just felt like kind of the 0-0 game we could have been seeing, but at the very end, Brazil picked it up, but it definitely took them much longer than arguably they should have to find that goal and that creativity again in the final third. But, the moment of brilliance we've seen, Brazil might have the top 3, goals of the tournament already. And that one is, from Casemiro, is no short of something stunning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Brazil on 6 points now, +3 goal differential, essentially has won the group. And it does set up an interesting final round match, because Brazil can rest everybody. They're playing Cameroon. You're not worried too much there in whatever that result's going to be. But what makes it fascinating is what happened in the other game in this group, and we'll jump to that right now. Is Cameroon and Serbia, for the 5 a.m. crew, gave us an absolute banger. Took a little while to get started in this one, but Castelletto ends up scoring in the 29th minute, and that was a real surprise, as you just kind of assumed that Serbia was going to be the better side. And certainly they showed towards the end of the half that they look like the better side as they score twice in stoppage time, rapid fire Pavlovic. And then, immediately afterwards, we get a goal from Milinkovic. And at that point, you're like, all right, the Cameroonian dream is over. There's no chance of them coming back. Serbia adds a third goal, and you're really like, well, it's done. And then just absolute pandemonium, like bedlam breaks out in the second half. Abu Bakar scores, and then Choupo-Moting scores as well. I mean, it's such a rarity to get 4 goals in a game in this day and age, let alone 6. And to have essentially, a 2-goal comeback to grab a point. I mean, first of all, credit to Cameroon for not giving up on the game, but also credit to Serbia for, playing as well as they did for the middle third. It's just fascinating how bad the Serbian defense was at holding the line in the back. And that really ended up being the difference in the game. It was just bad formation, bad utilization of the back line. It allowed the Cameroonians to do the thing they do best, which is pass through that line and get on goal.
It was shocking, of course, watching the highlights over. I was watching, and the high line, you're like, well, they're up by 2 goals, and you're shocked that you mentioned they're playing in that play style, and they look like they kind of had nothing to lose. And considering, how much, of course, we mentioned goal difference, but the fact that they couldn't really scrape away all 3 points was something to a surprise. And, Cameroon's so quick at the back, and, twice they just blast right past Serbia and eventually get those goals. But, on the other end, Serbia does a nice job. They feel like they could have won this match. Mitrovic had a couple really good opportunities as well that were just missed, and some key saves here and there. But this is, the back and forth 3-3 thriller that feels like every World Cup gets. And who would have known that it would have been this match, the final, really early match in the window. But it's questionable from Serbia, but you got to mention, we've talked about the African teams have really done a nice job on match day 2 to once again implement themselves as teams you can't count out of a World Cup. And we've seen it, of course, with Morocco beating Belgium and other results. But it's going to make for a really interesting match day 3. And I think that Cameroon's going to be happy that Brazil ended up winning because, if you're going to give one of those teams, Cameroon or Serbia, a shot to overtake Switzerland, well, if Serbia, of course, beats Switzerland straight up, then that checks that box. But I think you give Cameroon a solid chance as well. But it kind of all depends what Brazil wants to do. And you'd assume that, Brazil right now, they'd be playing the team that finishes second in Group H, which we don't really know who that's going to be right now. We don't doubt it's going to be Portugal. They're already through. So it could make for a really interesting match day 3. And this 3-3 result just adds on to that.
Yeah, 28 combined shots, 13 combined shots on goal in this one. If you missed this game, I feel bad for you. I was glad I got up for it. And, that 5 a.m. window here in the U.S., at least in the Eastern time zone, keeps delivering. I'm going to miss it. I'm not going to miss it being at 5 a.m., but I will miss the exclusive club that I felt like I was in watching those games with the bots that were tweeting out the morning news stories. Last game to talk about, another African side surprising everybody. Ghana 3, South Korea 2, completely upending what we thought was going to happen in Group H. I talked earlier about how the South Korea-Uruguay game, we watched that. We were like, wow, both these teams played to a stalemate. They were really good. And then South Korea in this just completely fell apart defensively early on. Ghana, who was the worst rated team according to the FIFA standings coming into this World Cup, they were given basically no shot by anybody. They have acquitted themselves incredibly well thus far in this World Cup. They only lost their first match by a goal, and they scored goals on Portugal in that. To watch them in this one just kind of go nuts early on and figure out a way to get a 2-goal lead and then watch them give it away. The Koreans deserve a lot of credit for coming out really organized in the second half. 2 goals out of Cho Gui-sung, but then Ghana nabs that whiffed pass shot. Kudus ends up putting it in the back of the net. South Korea outshoots Ghana 22-7, outshots on goals them 7-3, and yet it's the 3 shots on goal that end up being the goals for Ghana, and that's the ball game.
Yeah, should we start taking FIFA rankings and treat them like election pundits and just throw whatever they say out the window? Because this has really been one of those tournaments where there's nothing as predictable. And we knew that coming in with, of course, the match fitness of all these players. But, you got to give credit to Korea coming out and at least proving something. And, we talk about their best players, Uruguay, we mentioned Nunez and others didn't necessarily were on their game. You could say the same for Son, who we knew coming in we wouldn't know if he'd be healthy, of course, with that nose. He's still wearing a mask over it. But, he didn't really provide a whole ton today. And they still were able to really come out with two really well-worked headers. And this is another game where it felt like the goalkeeping, it could have been a bit better. I think in that 3-3 game, there were a couple of them that the goalkeepers could have had, maybe a bit in this one as well. But, what a game. On a team like Ghana, you think after that 3-2 game where they tied it up at 2, you thought they'd nick a point. Everything would go wrong for them. But they came right in, 2 goals in basically the first half an hour or so, and then a nice job, basically a really nice response after South Korea gets those quick 2. I was looking at my phone during this, and every time I look away, I look back at it and be like, oh my God, there's another goal in the second half. Because that's just how quick both of these teams played. And another good work at the back from Ghana, and now they've put themselves in a pretty good position in this Group H to get something out of it. And they have a Uruguay team that hasn't shown too much on the offensive end. So, it could be a strength versus strength. Ghana can score goals left and right with their speed up top. And Uruguay, well, they're going to have to play for something. They're going to have to play for a win and maybe some goal differential as well. So that'll be a really fun match and in the next few days.
Yeah, there's so much intrigue now in all of these groups, and we're not going to cover all of them today. We'll talk about them as we kind of meter them out. But as we get ready for tomorrow, we've got our first set of knockout games. We start off with the Group A games with Ecuador and Senegal, and then Qatar and the Netherlands. And let's just start there. Those are the 10 a.m. Eastern time games. This is an interesting group because Qatar's done, but everybody's still alive. You've also got the fact that Qatar, I really don't think wants to walk out of here having not won or a game or gotten a point. So you look at it and you say to yourself, well, the easy money would be on, well, yes, of course, we're just, going to see the Netherlands walk over Qatar, but this is they're going to throw whatever's in the kitchen sink at this game, and it's not like the Netherlands have looked that impressive thus far. Meanwhile, in the other game, so first of all, the Netherlands, all they need is a draw, and they'll go through, and they can still get the win. Ecuador qualifies with either a win or a draw, and Senegal has to beat Ecuador. Senegal, another of those teams that has looked better than I think people thought that they would. Right now, Ecuador and the Netherlands both on a +2 goal differential. Senegal on a 0 goal differential and only 1 point back. What are you expecting out of this match day? It's a pretty fascinating scenario.
Yeah, who'd have thought that the group we thought would kind of be the easiest would maybe be one of the most intriguing ones, considering Qatar is one of the only teams, of course, other than Canada, that still don't have a point. And we mentioned Qatar, though the earliest exit of any team ever in the World Cup, which is maybe not as shocking considering
yes,
it's not usual, right? How a team like this would, of course, a host like this would have a team like this in the tournament, but I can't imagine that they're going to basically just allow the Netherlands to, I guess, walk over them, even though the Netherlands, we expected to walk over this group. It hasn't really been that way. And that Ecuador-Senegal match is really going to be fascinating. Senegal has been a much better team. I don't think the 2-0 result against the Netherlands, that loss was really a 2-0 score. It felt like a bit closer, and then they just walked right over Qatar, as it feels like everyone has. But Ecuador should have really gotten 3 points against the Netherlands in that match. They, I believe, trailed very early and then came back for a goal, but should have really added another one at least. The XG would tell you that. So I'm expecting the Netherlands to go through. I can't imagine that whatever Qatar throws at them will be enough to, I guess, prevent them from getting all 3 points. And I think a draw might be fair in the Ecuador-Senegal match. So I had everything standing right now. But, if you're looking at who you want to play in Group B, I think any one of the U.S., Iran, or England, you wouldn't necessarily want to play, especially if they can get a win. So I don't see a reason why the Netherlands should maybe go for second and hope for, something else. I don't think that's going to be really an issue.
The big question, of course, with Ecuador is what's the status of Enner Valencia? As he left the last game with a knee injury. It's apparently a sprain, according to the coach for Ecuador. And Valencia has, he's said, and you would expect him to say this, like he's determined to play in this game. They probably need him. because that's really been the sole source of their goal scoring. And I like Ecuador overall in this, but Senegal, that is a tough team to try to play against. And what's interesting here is Senegal knows they have to go for a win, whereas Ecuador has in the back of their mind, okay, we could get a draw and still make it through. And that can be a dangerous mindset for a team in these situations. When your back is completely against the wall, sometimes it ends up being more in your favor because you just play slightly differently in that scenario.
Yeah, especially if one of those teams, goes up by a goal. It's always, and do you play back for a draw, or do you just kind of go for the win? Of course, they'll know what's happening. There's, the slim chance that the Netherlands gets blown out by Qatar and they somehow don't make it out of the group, which I guess in this World Cup, we couldn't essentially rule it out completely considering the way matches have gone, but I doubt Qatar would be able to pull that off. So it'll be interesting the way that the Netherlands play. You'd expect them to just not have to worry about anything else. They should win this group as expected. And then they'll have to wait to see what happens in Group B.
So let's talk about Group B, the 2 p.m. games. This is where everybody's paying attention to, obviously, here in the USA, as the Americans take on the Iranians and England takes on Wales. Everybody's still alive in this group, which is wild to think about. But this is, when Iran scored late to win that game versus Wales, my first thought was, okay, that's terrible for the U.S. because what it means is the U.S. their only recourse is winning. They have to win to go through. Any other result, they're out. And to some degree, that can be helpful, as we just talked about with Senegal. But you do, on the flip side, like to have the cushion if things aren't going your way of being able to pick up a draw. Meanwhile, Iran, calculus is very simple. If they draw and Wales doesn't win by a boatload of goals, they're going through. England basically just has to avoid getting annihilated by Wales, and they're going through. And Wales has to win and hope some other things go their way. So the U.S. is in pretty good shape here, but it is really kind of interesting how this played out. Again, I feel to some degree, as much as people have talked about how things have played out fairly well for the Americans, I actually think things have played out about as badly as they could given the scenario, because England's got this huge goal differential now that they can rely on. And Iran has 3 points, whereas the U.S. has only picked up 2. Not a nightmare scenario for the U.S., but it could have gone better overall.
Yeah, I think you have definitely taken a draw, but I think in the end, you don't have to worry about the other match, which I think is important. Of course, you go back to 2018, they had to do a job in Trinidad, and even if they lost that, they were still given a pretty good chance considering 2 other results had to go against them in order for them to qualify. Well, we all know what happened there. So the focus being on this game is going to be important for them, and I think the fact that you can't count them out. We've talked about how a lot of the stoppage time has affected matches in this World Cup. Of course, the second goal today for Portugal via the nice penalty from Bruno Fernandes came very late in that lengthy stoppage time. So that definitely is going to have something to do with it. And of course, that's what happened in the Iran-Wales match. But it's all on the table for the U.S. I think going in as a fan, if you told them, well, if you win, you're in, you don't have to worry about anything else on match day 3, I think you would have taken that. I think draw against England was much less likely than a draw to Wales in a certain mindset. So they had something needed to go their way after the result to Wales, and they did themselves a favor by getting a point, which now I guess they didn't really need as much against England, but it gives them a lot of confidence. And I guess if you're an England fan, you got to have some questions about Southgate's decision-making in this game. And they certainly, the ball is on their side of the pitch. Essentially, they can do whatever they want, and they'll basically pretty much still go through amidst a massive basically a huge downfall performance against Wales. But of course, the England versus Wales rivalry there, you can't count the Welsh out, and this is going to be a really fun group. And the fact that all 4 teams are alive just adds more stakes to it.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a fascinating experience, and they were mentioning it on one of the broadcasts today. It's like, these tend to be very unpleasant to watch if you're emotionally invested. I very much remember that last match day in 2010 against Algeria, where the U.S. you just sat there the whole time and you're like, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And then it happens at the end and everybody's euphoric, and that's what you remember 12 years from now. But the rest of the game, not pleasant. And it's a tough game for the U.S. They don't have a proven goal scorer. And they probably need to score 2 goals in this game, I think, to guarantee any sort of the result that they need. I think maybe you can get away with one goal if all you need is a draw, but they need more than a draw in this, and I'm not convinced that they're going to be able to keep the Iranians out. Meanwhile, the Iranians are really mad, given this whole controversy with the flag and the emblem. That is, as we saw with Croatia against Canada, you don't want to give other teams that bulletin board material, even if you didn't do it yourself. So it's not an ideal stew of situations right now for this U.S. team, and they're going to really have to dig deep and figure out a way to get through. I'm also fascinated with England, Wales, just because this is the Super Bowl for Wales. Like this is their one chance that they're going to get with this generation to face off against the English on the international stage. I don't think there's any way they beat them by 5 goals, but it adds another layer of intrigue to the whole thing that's going to be fascinating to watch. And I'm curious to see how England reacts in a game where they really don't need it, not just results-wise, but emotionally as much as the Welsh do.
Yeah, you talk about, of course, the Iran side, how they're going to be motivated. I watched the interview with Tyler Adams, and the Iranian reporter, straight up said it first before even asking her question. By the way, you're saying our country wrong, which definitely added something, and then asked a very interesting question off the field about the U.S. Treatment of black people, and I thought he actually gave a really, really good answer considering he was kind of cornered there. So I would think for him as a captain, he wouldn't really want that to slide with his team, and I assume they really have to be motivated, of course, knowing all the geopolitical issues with Iran before the tournament, and then of course against the U.S. as well. If you can't get up for either of these games at 2:00 and you don't have them both on split screen, I don't know what's wrong with you as a sports fan, I guess, in general, because of all the tension between these 4 countries respectively.
Yeah, no, it's going to be wild. So we'll look forward to seeing what happens, and we'll have some more coverage afterwards as we try to dissect what occurred. And at that point we'll have 4 teams. And we'll know what the matchups are going to be for that knockout round, as A1's going to match up with B2 and B1's going to match up with A2. So anyway, Austin, any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
This was the day I think everyone was waiting for. You had probably 2 of the best games of the tournament and a couple of really nice goals worked in there as well. The African countries, as we mentioned, pulling their weight as you'd expect. And that makes it interesting tomorrow with Senegal and maybe even Qatar. And then, the 2:00 matches are so important. Of course, tomorrow is a huge day for U.S. soccer really as a whole. We mentioned that going in, it was going to be a tough group. We were kind of warned by, some of the guest speakers in class that Iran might be a team to watch out for. And what do you know? They're in jockeying position right now. But, of course, with 4 years on the line, the fact that if the U.S. can make it and win a game in the group stage and get away with 5 points, which would be a pretty good mark for them. It was the same in 2010 when they sneaked past. It would be huge for, the country overall, of course, the fans, which are trying to get more into it. And the fact that the England match drew so many, awesome audience for Black Friday really is inspiring, considering there was a lot of other sports going on. And tomorrow at 2:00, I'm really curious to see what the streaming and the views look like against a match that maybe is even bigger than England in terms of the geopolitical mindset.
It should be a fascinating day, and we'll look forward to chatting about it tomorrow. Anyway, for Austin Platt, Galen Clavey. This is Pod of the Century. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe, like, comment, rate, review, whatever. iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. We're all over the place. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.